Hello and welcome to the Lyle podcast. I've been wanting to talk about this topic for a while. It's very pertinent to what's going on. I want to talk about fear. And we all have our own individual fears, our personal fears. Fear is just a part of going through life. And then fear can be part of the culture that we're brought up in. Fear can be something that's projected onto us, and fear is something that we need to develop a relationship with. If we're going to live our healthiest lives, we need to understand. We need to understand when fear is present. We need to have an attunement to fear. And when we see fear is present, then we decide, what are we going to do about that fear? And I've had a posture towards fear where, the intent anyway, of over a decade is that when I see fear, because most of the fear that we face is not life or death. It's something that would be like emotional discomfort or kind of distress, and some element of risk, maybe in a social setting or at work, things like that. Fear to speak your mind. But I've had this posture and this ethic towards fear that once I can identify fear, I move in the direction of fear. And that's because I don't want fear to control me. So fear has this constricting property if it goes unchecked. If we're not aware of its presence, it can be used. It can control us, and then because it can control us, it can be used to control us. And we're seeing this a lot in our political climate in the U.S., and it's not that it's been absent. It's actually, I would contend, been there for a long time. And this is probably why when you think of why haven't I gone for those dreams? Why haven't I risked in that relationship or with that job? Or there's certain expectations that our society has for us, and we are expected to fit within that mold. And there's this low-level fear that we deal with because we see people that act outside the norms and we see how they're treated, and we don't want that. We're actually afraid. We're afraid of that. And so we kind of participate actually in the alienation of other people and the mistreatment of other people by acquiescing to these expectations, this fear that is put on us, and that it's a fear that's often, this low-level fear is often unstated. And I've been doing a lot of work unpacking this in my personal life, and that's not what I want to talk about here. I want to use words like fascism and autocracy. And these are not words that I'm very practiced in saying. And even right now, I'm pulling up some notes because I want just a little bit of backup in talking about these. I think I hear these words increasingly. They were used a lot in the past tense, or used a lot for places outside of the United States of America. But we're definitely in a climate. So an autocracy is a government in which one person possesses unlimited power, ultimate power. An autocracy is a government in which one person possesses unlimited power. And we have a president who puts out pictures of himself as the next pope, or calls himself a king. And kings are not elected officials. They are there by birthright, and they're there, as long as they're alive. And that is not the structure of the U.S. government. And so there's a lot of, and we see, and associated with his movements for power are a lot of like mistreatment of other people, and a lot of it is the most vulnerable people. So immigrants, people with different gender identities, people with different abilities. So people with who are differently abled. When in the past we say like have disabilities, they have struggles in getting through life, and people that are veterans, people that are impoverished, people that are women. And we are made to, in these injustices towards these populations in our society have been longstanding. And to not recognize this and not act as if that is fact is some sort of, it's either an ignorance or it's a turning a blind eye. It's a sticking of the head in the sand, a numbing. It's oftentimes we see people as they get close to power, this adjacency to power, that they'll like abdicate their power, whatever privilege they have, to be able to point at the lesser people. And we see this a lot in race in the U.S. We see this through, there's just a really great book, Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, that points to how, and she's not the first to talk about this, but she just really brilliantly brought together how power has been consolidated in the United States and you see like poor white people aligning themselves with people very much not like them, rich white people, so that they can have a people to subjugate, which is dark-skinned people, which is black persons, and there's evidence of different where poor people came together in uprising against wealthy landowners, wealthy plantation owners, and there's so many rules, so many cultural norms, so many laws that are put in place to separate and divide. And so these have been long-standing. There's things like redlining, things that came out of like Jim Crow, like separate but equal. Now we see the movement towards DEI, and so we see, for example, we see white women siding with white men for that adjacency to power while giving up our own rights, because diversity, equity, inclusion includes gender equity. And I'm so excited that we had Sarah Driver on the podcast and got to hear about her work in social justice, in gender equity. And it's really interesting. So people will do it for whiteness. People will do it in the patriarchy. So we find ourselves in a situation where things are just really turned up. People's rights are really being violated by someone who's claiming power that they don't own, but they're just kind of pushing things through. And it seems that a lot of people are in fear because we are allowing this. We are, for the most part, many are just kind of going about their daily lives as if this isn't happening. And the question is why? And I would put forth that fear is a big reason, because if you align yourself with marginalized people, and so when you work with allied people, there's this concept of allyship, and I really appreciate this verbiage that you shouldn't stop with allyship, which ally, you're on the same side. You think like allies in a war, that you have mutual goals and interests and you support one another. But and I'm in this moment, I am really nervous that I'm going to forget the term. I think co-conspirator is the term, is which is advocated more by marginalized persons, and that means that you as a privileged person are actually putting yourself on the line for these marginalized people. And this is what we're not seeing. We're seeing a lot of silence, and silence comes in so many forms. It comes from like averting eyes, not making eye contact to people that are in need. It comes in like not intervening when you see somebody in trouble, maybe not even videoing, or just you see so many people videoing while maybe somebody is being subject to violence, and people not physically intervening, not putting their body in the line to protect that person. And people being silent with how they spend their money, continuing to spend money, give money to corporations whose purposes are really just to generate wealth for themselves, to the detriment of society, to the detriment of nature. It's really, really... It's pretty scary, right? And so I thought about this since 2016. And I kind of decided then, well, did I decide? I was confronted with that this felt, even then, so over 8 years ago, felt like I felt this movement towards fascism, and even 8 years later, I still don't feel this is really me being less silent and using my voice. And there is a risk with that, because this will be public. It'll go on the internet. There'll be video of me. There's audio of me. And frankly, it just feels like the right thing to do. And I wish I could have done it sooner, because 8 years ago, I was confronted with this reality that, was I going to be an outspoken person, or was I going to be like a Schindler's List kind of person, or somebody that tucked away like the Anne Franks of the world? And I had no idea the path that it was going to take. I had no idea at the time about the struggle of the Palestinian people. I had no idea of our complicity with that. My Christian upbringing really had me thinking positively of Israel, even though Israel in its current form as a state hasn't been around for 80 years. And it only came about after the Nakba, the catastrophe, the disaster, the forced, the violence, and murder and displacement of the Palestinian people out of their land so that Israel could become a state. The biblical context of Israel was something I was really acquainted with, and I was used to people going to Israel, even as in evangelical Christianity, going to Israel as the rite of passage or the spiritual journey to see these holy sites. And I've never been, I can't say anything about that, but I never heard of these people, friends that I knew, acquaintances, going. I never heard them talk about the Palestinian plight, but I was aware of, World War II and the Holocaust and what happened to Jews, and I'm definitely a believer in never again, and never again means never again for anybody. So in 2016, I felt like the arc of history was bringing us back to this point where in hindsight we can look with judgment and say, how could these people allow it? And then we're in the midst of that right now. We're looking in the midst of book bannings and book burnings and people compiling weapons and ammunition and people using hateful language towards other people calling people, like Jewish people even, and this is not universal, but a lot of Israelis and Christian nationalists using dehumanizing terms like the Nazis did against the Jews. But the Nazis, of course, didn't just murder Jews. They murdered communists and socialists and gender non-conforming people and artists and historians and politicians that didn't align with Hitler and the Third Reich and their goals of the Aryan state of white supremacy. And it's interesting to have learned things over the years that Hitler learned like how to do the violences that he did because of chattel slavery in the U.S. And the U.S. has really not come to terms with the violences that we have done. And to the indigenous people here, how we killed all their buffalo, all the people, all the boarding schools, the Trail of Tears. And there's just still so much that I don't know. There's almost full erasure and forcing onto these reservations. They used to just inhabit like all the land, and now they're subjugated in these small places and because of the trauma, have high levels of addiction and violence and things like diabetes and autoimmune diseases. And the U.S. has never come to terms with that. There's not been reparations. There's not been acknowledgement. There's not been apologies. There's not been justice for these descendants. And the same is true for descendants of people in chattel slavery. There's still people that go to the South and on these plantations where people were tortured and murdered and forced to work and build all these wealth for all these wealthy tobacco, cotton landowners. That is still such a part of the wealth in the U.S. People still go and have parties and celebrations on this blood-stained land. Really, there's so much blood here. So of course there's fear in the United States because this is part of our culture. Even our national anthem talks about bombs bursting in air, and just if you examine our language, there's just so much violence. You're doing such a great job. We don't say that. We don't say, "Oh, it's so beautiful," or "You work so hard," or "I'm so proud of you." We say, "You're killing it. That was the bomb. You slayed it. That's sick." Like our language is very very violent, very violent. And if I had made a list, I could rattle off more here. But let's talk about fascism. So the definition I gave of autocracy was from Merriam-Webster, and this will be the same for fascism. Fascism is a populist political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, that is associated with a centralized autocratic government. Remember, autocracy is a government in which one person possesses unlimited power. So it's associated with a centralized government in which one person possesses unlimited power, headed by a dictatorial leader, and that is characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and by forceful suppression of opposition. So we're seeing all kinds of restrictions in freedom of speech. We're seeing all kinds of federal grants taken away from research. We're seeing things swiped off the internet that have to do with things that people of color have done, that women have done. We've seen things like tariffs and these policies that are creating a lot of economic instability that we're only just in the first phases of. And then there's, you think of all the, women that are dying and things because they're not allowed to have an abortion even when they're at the risk of dying. There's a woman that I just read who, I think she had a brain hemorrhage, and she's been kept alive for several months because she had, her baby was 2 months old, or that's not right, 8 weeks old, and I think there was a 6-week limit that you can't have an abortion at that time in the state that she's living. So she's brain dead, kept alive, and meanwhile she died because she didn't receive the care that she was sent home. She wasn't provided. She's a black woman, was not provided with the care, and her family can't grieve, and the baby is not going to survive. But the healthcare providers are not able to offer the care. So I've never talked like this publicly, using words like fascism and autocracy. But we have to decide what we're going to do. Being silent just allows things to continue. There's lots of ways to use your voice online, in your social groups, with how you spend your money, where your investment is. We can talk about investment. I found out that my mutual funds, retirement funds, are supporting all kinds of weapons manufacturers, all sorts of companies that are depleting the earth of the resources, all kinds of companies that are just feeding billionaires that are not taking care of their customers, their employees. So think of things like Meta and Amazon and Tesla. And then there's all kinds of companies that are going back to war. And it's been really sobering to find out just really how many people make a living by supporting like war infrastructure, tanks and bulldozers and missiles and the intelligence needs. And this isn't just military, this is all kinds of companies. And now we have surveillance, and that is just way more potent than it was before. There was a TED episode. This is what a digital coup looks like. This was posted a month ago, and it's Carol Cadwalder. And there's so many resources to learn about what's going on. There's ways to deal with your fear. We can talk about that more. but don't. Fear is a cage. As your fear goes up, the cage gets smaller and smaller. So if you're feeling that fear tightening up on you, tightening its grip, maybe it's a sign to start practicing using your voice. I'm going to let you go because I'm going to practice using my voice, and I'm going to go to an open mic. May you always see the blessing, everyone. I'm rooting for you. Life is beautiful. Life is beautiful. It's super hard too, but don't forget to look for the awe, the wonder, the beauty. Make sure to create. I don't want to leave you just on this fearful, kind of sad note, because using your voice is very critical to living integrated, and to live a healthy life, you need to live integrated. If you shut off parts of yourself, of your values, and you don't follow them through, you will start to have dis-ease, which will manifest even, you might feel it as unease initially, but that'll start when that's prolonged over time. That'll manifest itself physiologically in some sort of disease and dysfunction in your body. Excuse me. Yeah, may you always see the blessing. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Lyle Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. If you liked what you heard, you can find me on Instagram and YouTube at The Elbetrell, as well as on my website, www.theelbetrell.com. Of course, you can find me back here at the next episode of the Lyle Podcast. There's numerous ways to support my work so I can keep helping you live your healthiest life. You can do this financially via links on my website or the show notes, by subscribing to the podcast and YouTube channels, by joining my newsletter community, aptly named the Lyle Newsletter, by rating the podcast, by sharing with others, those you meet, and participating in coaching sessions. It's my passion to help you live your healthiest life. I'm so glad you're here. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you're learning and the insights you're gaining from these conversations. May you always see the blessing.